APUA has always had a hurricane plan. The improvement that we have had in recent time has been where we have a disaster management plan. The disaster management plan is an amplification, is taking the hurricane plan to a higher level, to not only look at hurricane, but to look at any potential disaster, earthquake, flood, natural disaster, man-made disaster. So it gives very broad guidelines of how to deal with disaster of any type. And then it drills down to the specific disaster. What has been fleshed out in details is the hurricane side of the disaster management plan. The broad terms are preparedness, which is really doing your preparation in terms of your maintenance. You do that up to the hurricane season. Then there's response. If you get hit, your immediate response to, as it were, get back the electricity as quick as possible. Then there's recovery to, as it were, get back to business almost as normal. And then there is mitigation, which is the lessons that you would have learned, that you implement them, as it were, in preparation for the next hurricane season. So that's a broad cycle of preparedness, response, recovery, mitigation. Hurricane preparedness essentially means that you prepare yourself, position the company as best as you can for the start of the hurricane season. So it means that you do your maintenance, and from time to time the public would hear that APUA is asking for outages, especially to do vegetation management, where you have an outage in different areas and you cut the trees, as simple as that. And it gets more complicated or more technical when we start about changing insulators, changing switches, changing poles, cross arms. So we do maintenance as best as we can on the system. Preparedness means that we have materials on stock in case we get hit, that we have our specialized vehicles in good operating order, that we have our staff alerted and trained, and that we have checked our radios and we are prepared as best as we can. The response speaks to your immediate response after the hurricane or storm would have impacted the island, and in particular the electricity business unit. The response speaks to after the Met Office has given the all clear, what you do immediately. What we attempt to do initially is to clear the road of any fallen asset, meaning poles, wires, transformer. Then one of the things that we need the public to understand, and we ask for the patience in that, is that when we would have been hit by a storm, one of the first things that APUA employees have to do is to go out and do what we call an assessment. We have to go, as it were, throughout the island and assess what has been damaged. We have to determine if up in Freetown there are 2 poles down, in Old Road there's a transformer down, and in, should I say, 5 Island, 3 poles down, Cedar Grove, another 2. You have to make that assessment. And once we would have made that assessment and assess how many employees are immediately available, then we come up with a plan to deploy and start actual restoration. We go by feeders, or areas, maybe a term that persons will be more familiar with. But the area which a feeder where the electricity goes, we call that, the network is called feeder. It constitutes the poles, the wires, the transformers from a particular circuit breaker. So by feeders, and by areas, we deploy different crews to go and visually inspect, yes. So they would see some of the things that are obvious to the public. They could see the transformers down. Some of the things that are not so obvious to the public, that the trained eyes would pick up, like damaged insulators, twisted cross arms, strained wires. So they would pick up those defects or damages, and then they record them, catalog them, and then they feed them back to, as it were, the control center or the command center. So recovery, with respect to the main prongs of hurricane management, it follows the response. So if I might just step back again, that you have the preparedness where you make sure you order your materials, you do your maintenance, you would have discussed with your crews the plans to organize them in different work groups so that when you get a storm, you get notice, everybody is aware of what crew they fall into. And in terms of the response, if I might just say that in the response stage, as I say, it's the quick response, and may I use this opportunity to say that part of what guides the response is what we call priority feeders. So we have some priority feeders, like some should be obvious to the public. And again, feeders are like the areas. And if I might dare say, the main load centers are the main loads that we try to connect immediately in the response, because immediately is like the response. That would be the obvious ones at the hospital. So the route, the supply that takes power to the hospital, the supply that takes power to the airport. The next one that will become obvious is the city. We want St. John City to be lit. Then after that, we do know the water business unit, their production is mainly driven by electricity, the reverse osmosis plant. So we have to get power to the main RO plants. Those are the priority feeders. So we try to get those up in the response phase. Then after that, then it's more into sort of maybe longer term. Hopefully it's quick, but then we do the other feeders after that. Recovery speaks to getting back almost to business. So we will have to make a determination to the extent that how bad is the damage? Do we need to call in our colleagues from Caribbean Electric Utilities? Meaning, like, do we need people from St. Lucia or Barbados to come in and assist us? Sometimes the government may need to be called in to get even assistance beyond that. They may need to ask the British to help us, to help send in a crew or two. So recovery has to do with getting back to business almost as usual, which could be longer term, like in the case of Lewis in '95. Right? So recovery speaks to that, to get back everybody, to get back all of APUA, all of the feeders up and running, to get back business as usual. That's the recovery, which is more longer term. Mitigation really is, in simple language, is the lesson learned and what you're going to do about it. So pretty much, you have a storm and you would have had some poles went down. You have had the experience where we would have had more insulator pins broken than we would have anticipated. So the lessons we learn from the activity or the events, it's having reviewed it as a utility, we come up with some lessons learned. So we know that we need to look at pole top pins for our insulators. That's an area where we have to look at maybe the type of insulators that we're using and the frequency of maintenance on those. So that's one of the mitigating actions that we have learned from the event that we will implement from now up to the next hurricane season and going forward. So mitigation really captures that scenario. APUA assures the public that on an ongoing basis, as part of its normal operation, it prepares for hurricane in its weekly day-to-day activities. And as it gets closer to the start of the hurricane season, it ramps up its activities by way of ensuring that materials are on stock and the heavy-duty vehicles are serviced. Our staff are very experienced and trained, and we assure the public that we are providing even more training to enhance and certify their skills as time goes by. APA continually prepares for hurricane on an ongoing basis. and we are ready to respond and recover from any storm as best as we can, having the resources at our disposal.